Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make traditional style pocket holes without any sort of Kreg jig or any other jig like that. Hope you enjoy. For those of you that are unaware that pocket holes actually go back quite some time, I have seen photos of pocket hole sort of brace bits that go into your brace for actually doing them that have a little sharp sort of baubled area, so it's got a like a drill bit part and then a little round cutter, and that would cut them out. I've not been able to source one. I'd love to, but I've had no luck actually finding one. So today we're going to be doing two different ways. One of them is just using a straight gouge. We will use the chisel to cut a flat part, and then there's another style where you can just do a completely square one using just a flat chisel. So starting up here, I'm actually going to just show you how I mark it out for this, and we'll do the square one first and then we'll jump in and I'll show you how to do the gouge one, because sometimes that has a few issues. So let's jump in here and get started. So obviously the first step is to mark exactly where we want our pocket holes to go. So on these I'm going to come in, just so I got enough space here, let's say 80mm on both sides. Now when it comes to how far in you come, it does depend on the timber you're using with pine, because it can crush up. I like to give myself about 10mm in, so the screw's got 10mm of material between itself and what it's screwing into. So I'm just going to use a marking gauge here and just mark that line in there. Now I've purposely gone a little bit wider because these pocket holes are not going to be as tight and clean as modern ones with modern jigs, modern materials, modern drill bits, all of that, because we're obviously doing this by hand. So you can see when I put that gauge line on here, it's quite a wide gauge line, because say we're using the gouge, you can see how wide that's going to be. You chisel how wide it's going to be. The main reason for that is because the screws that we used at the time were big-headed, flat-headed, slotted screws, and they weren't really used for putting carcasses and anything like that together. They were primarily used for attaching tabletops to tables and things like that. That's where I've seen them used most traditionally. First of all, I said we were going to use the flat chisel, so I'm going to come in a few mil off my line, lined up in the middle with my cross line that you can see there, and I'm going to put a little cut line. Now, because this is the square one, I'm going to come up on the sides here, and I'm actually going to bring that right down to my gauge line as well. Because obviously, if we're going to be ramping that, we want it there. So, now you can come in, bevel down, or bevel up. It does depend. I prefer bevel down. And we're just going to shave this out. Now I have no choice but to go bevel up. And I can feel that I'm not severed on those sides, so I just need to nick that out. And I've come in now maybe close to half. So you want to come in close to half the material, or with our modern small-headed screws, however far you need to come in to allow that screw to get in and for you to actually drill it in. So now I'm going to come in on that gauge line and remove that material. So you can see what we've got here is a flat ridge and then a ramp in, and if I just quickly grab a screw or something, you can see here even on this screw that I haven't actually come down far enough, so I need to go down a little bit further so the entire head of that screw will disappear in there. Now it might just, but I'm going to take that down just a touch further, because I think I haven't quite gone halfway. Generally I find you want to go halfway through, say 19mm material like this, to get the screw hole to come out in the middle of your board, which is where you're kind of aiming for it to come out. you'll work out exactly what angle you need and how far you need to come down to get that screw in on the angle that you want, sort of as flat as you can get it. And so that will vary. This one that I'm doing here is quite a short one, but it should still work, especially if you're only using like a shorter screw. If you're using a longer one like this, you might need the ramp to be slightly different to get that screw to go in sort of straighter, because you want it to go in as, in this case, sort of as square as possible. So let's jump over here to this other side, and I'm going to show you how we use the gouge to do this. Now, a little caveat with using the gouge, sometimes it fails on some timbers. If it's not compliant timber, and sometimes, especially with pine, I've had it where it doesn't comply, but we're going to persevere here to do a similar sort of bit of joinery here for this pocket hole using the gouge. So let's jump down here and we'll try that. So just like the other one, we want to come in a few mil off our line so we don't bash that out before we want to, and we'll sever that. Now come in, and you can already see that this gouge is resisting, and I did just sharpen this and it's still resisting these fibers, which is not fantastic. So what I'm going to try and do is use a mallet for this. Ideally it's better if you can do this under just pressure from your hand, but as you can see this one's not going to comply as it currently is. So it's probably going to be a little bit messy, which is quite often common when doing this in pine. I've just stepped down to a smaller gouge in the hopes that it's going to be a little bit easier in this incompliant wood to actually get this complete, so you can see how both of them work. And this is a good example of choosing the correct timber for the correct style of doing this, and also having the correct tools for the job. It's not like power tools. Having the correct tools for the job when it comes to some of this stuff is vitally important, because each hand tool has its specific role. So I think I'm down deep enough here now, and I'll give you a close-up of this in a minute. So what I'm going to do is just bring my flat chisel in and sever those side fibers now. And then right in that gauge line, chop that out, and then we can bring the gouge back in to remove that material. Now, straight off here in this pine you can tell which one is better. Obviously the gouge gave me a lot of problems, and I kind of expected that with pine, because quite often pine just doesn't carve well, especially with gouges, even if they're sharp. Both those gouges out, I sharpened them up just prior to this in case I needed them. And so you can see that this is kind of ugly and messy. But put that into perspective, where you would likely be using this that's hidden up under a table to attach a tabletop traditionally. Yeah, it doesn't really matter what it looks like up under the table that you're never looking at. But personally for me, because it's a little bit easier, and I think part of this reason is that an in-cannel gouge would have been used for this. So an in-cannel gouge is not like the gouge I was using here. This is what's called essentially an out-cannel gouge, or a standard gouge where the bevel is on the outside of the sweep, not on the inside. An in-cannel gouge has that bevel on the inside, and it makes it act more like a normal, just a normal everyday bench chisel by having that bevel on the inside of that versus the outside. So it would have worked a lot better on that had I had one of those, but I have no real need to purchase one. You can get them, but I don't see the purpose. And so if I was doing this, my personal preference would be to just use a nice sharp bench chisel and give that square look. It's nice, quick, easy, and much tidier, and works in every timber because you can just sever the fibers so much easier instead of the mess that we got here. So now I just wanted to jump down over here. I'm going to drill a couple of holes in here and we'll put this together just so you can see how well it works. So the first thing you're going to notice is that my drill's going to get in the way here a little bit, but I'm just going to angle it in as best I can. Which means that drill bit's still going to come out in the center, but it's going to be angled slightly, which is part of the issue. And you'll see this one, similar sort of thing. Now, I don't necessarily have to pre-drill these. You could just push it in because it's pine, but there's always a risk of it splintering, and so with just standard stuff I like to pre-drill, but you don't necessarily have to. So let's, what I'm going to do is, these tops are pre-drilled, but I'm going to offset this so you can see that it can work without going into the pre-drill on the bottom. So that's gone in nice and snug. And now if we have a look at that, you can see they've pulled in nice and tight. It's just as strong, but obviously it's not as clean and tidy as your modern jigs with one specifically designed drill bits to get everything in alignment exactly perfect. So there you have it, folks. That's the traditional style pocket hole, whether you do it with a gouge or a straight chisel. My preference is the straight chisel because it's just so much easier, especially if you don't have an in-can or gouge, which most of you are definitely not going to own, and you've probably all got a bench chisel, so it's just a quicker and easier approach. In my opinion, looks quite a bit cleaner. You can be the judge of that. Let me know down below. So one other thing I wanted to touch on here is other ways in which I use these kind of joints other than just attaching a straight tabletop. Now, one big one is over here, my chisel rack. I use that for attaching it. And a few of these other bits, I've actually used those, like the shelf up the top here, just to attach things onto the wall because the screws are a little bit hidden, and sometimes, or some cases, I actually have no choice but to angle it in there, and it's just the easiest way to attach things. And that's actually, this cabinet here is how I've got that attached to the wall with a couple of these. Although they're visible on the inside of the cabinet, I have used them to attach on an angle up into the back panel to attach it and stop it from falling down. And yeah, I don't want that falling down. So there are a couple of other ways that I use this sort of thing. But obviously, any of the other ways that we use modern jigs, like the Craig jigs, for doing this sort of thing, you can use this same approach if you want, although it's probably not advisable because it's just going to be too much. It's too slow, in my opinion, and just not enough repeatability with something like this. But for attaching a tabletop, even if it's a big one where you're just doing a few once-off down your stretcher that's completely hidden, even though it's ugly like this, it doesn't really matter in my opinion, and that's why it was probably used, because it was just the easiest way to attach something like a tabletop. And if you'd like to see another great video such as the one you've seen here today, do check out the video up here where I build my chisel rack that you've just seen on the wall there. Bye for now.